processus, c'est le cheminement
Ce
d'un
n'est que le
flux.
tracé de lignes de fuite
Qu'est-ce que ça
par
veut
les
dire?
lignes de
C'est
fuite à
le
l'échelle
cheminement
supérieure.
d'un flux.
Le tracé
Qu'est-ce
de
que ça veut dire? C'est
par les lignes de
construit
fuite
sur une
à
unité, c'est-à-dire un trajet. Le trajet, il n'existe pas au point.
Hello there. My name's Brooks. This is Jure. You may recognize our voices a bit from the DGQC podcasts, as we've done a ton of Anti-Oedipus, Logic of Sense, and recently What is Philosophy? Of course, Jure also runs what groups?
I used to run Bataille. Now I run Difference and Repetition and the Being an Event group.
Yes. As we've started to sort of see that we had a decent group actually with us on the Spotify, on Google, on YouTube, we want to actually sort of grow the channel a bit and have some fun with it. And as we start getting that going, turning sort of the Quarantine Collective into more of a thing, we want to start sort of doing bigger and bigger things. We've got a little bit more coming as sort of the main central podcast of what we're setting up is going to be coming out, next couple of weeks. But as we sort of get that going, we want to get our feet wet with a couple of lighter things, and especially some stuff that we really love doing. And the big one for that is, especially for me as an English speaker, talking about new translations and new books and things that people might be able to sort of start digesting and taking in that they couldn't before. And we're very fortunate. We were reached out to by a wonderful translator, Louise Burchill, who's been working on Serres and Deleuze for a very long time. And recently, or soon will be, depending on, I guess, when you're hearing us, will be releasing her translation of Serres' Hermes I, Communication. We were fortunate to get an early copy of this and barrel our way through it. And we wanted to sort of, talk through some of the parts that stuck out to us, and share our sort of overall thoughts on it as we sort of run through the book. We're going to be doing a lot of this. We have as you can see behind me and behind Jure as well, there's more than a few books, and we kind of spend too much time reading. And there's a lot of smaller ones, a lot of bigger ones. And it's not quite the thing we do with Anti-Oedipus, where we, literally every word and discuss it and go over it. But this is intended to be much more of a discussion point and a chance for us to sort of talk about some thinkers we don't normally get a chance to. So we want to say a very big thanks to Louise for that. I hope I pronounce her name correctly. And
the book comes out on the 6th of December, if I'm correct.
Excellent. So either way, it'll be maybe right now. I myself, and I know we talked about this, Jure, but I'm a huge Michel Serres fan. My first book is also my favorite. Well, and that changes over time a little bit, but Thumbelina, or Petit Poucet, in the original, was my introduction. This was years ago, and it stuck out with me because it was kind of a sort of a critique of the boomer take on electronics and how kids are using electronics and all that. And I always love, odd sort of stuff like that. This was my influx into this. This was years and years ago. And since then, I've sort of dove deep into a lot of Serres' works. I have, the entire Foundations trilogy, by Biogia, and a ton of others. I adore everything sort of Serres has put out. And that's a little bit of my background. I know you a little bit more than me even.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've not interacted with Serres before, or Sir. I'm going to be mispronouncing it.
I anglicize everything and ruin it, so you can just blame me. It's fine.
I've not met him or like his work before I heard about him on DGQC actually, because he's not a sort of thinker which one reads in academia. Because I'm a student of philosophy. My background is more in a very academic setting. And someone like Serres really rarely pops out. Like I've only talked about him maybe once, and that's because I brought him up in a class. And then even bringing him up left the professor sort of confused because not many people have heard the name even. So he's still very much underappreciated thinker who's a contemporary of all of our other favorite thinkers, the big names such as Badiou and Deleuze and Foucault. They all sort of spring from the same nest, and it's a shame. And I'm very happy that we're getting more translations. The Hermes books have been translated into German, which is good, but the translations are extremely bad. There's a lack of footnotes.
In Hermes specifically, even some of these, there's an English translation, I think, from I want to say the mid to late 70s or 80s. I have a copy of it here that I've had for a long time and slowly made my way through some time ago. That is, it's rough. It's rough. A lot of the translations are rough, so it's nice to have someone sort of going back because, Sarah, and to what you're talking about, I don't come from academia. A lot of his works I find to be extremely digestible to people who don't have that sort of background. It's one of the reasons I tend to recommend him all the time to people. I love his works. Biology, for example, is aside from being beautifully printed in the English edition, it's like prose. It's not really philosophy. He doesn't do the hyper academic stuff like you see from a Derrida, for example, which is a lot more in that sort of tranche, or older Deleuze. And I think with Hermes, one of the things I noticed is this is definitely much more of that academic side of Serres that I'm not familiar with, and I was not super ready for, I think. Yeah, I mean, we might as well just dive into the book because I think that's the best intro for it. But for me, this was a lot more academic, Serres, than sort of the prose based and sort of long form. These are shorter essays, sort of really, really almost analytic in some of it. The early section of mathematics, which I really did my best to get through. I am not a smart man, I think, is the thing that comes out the other side. It is rough. It is. It's one of those things that when I tell people it helps with Deleuze to have a background in hard algebra or calculus, it helps to have that. I would say even more so for some of this with Serres. He really goes into a lot of shit in that early stuff. That's, I don't want to say dry because it's not dry. It's just dense as hell, like a more traditional academic work. Does that make sense? How I'm phrasing it?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, so. Before going into it, it's because a lot of the biggest part of that section is even a review of another book that concerns mathematics. So if you haven't read the piece yourself, you're gonna have a hard time following it. And I certainly had. And I'm not a mathematician. I had I had a good grades in mathematics, but I haven't done mathematics since my high school. I've been exclusively focusing philosophy and the little bit of mathematics that I need to understand some thinkers like Leibniz. But yeah, We can jump into it. I mean, should we sort of position this text in history because it's quite interesting.
Go for it.
So, I think, in my opinion, there's sort of two big eras of Serres thinking. So there is his dissertation and texts written before it, which are all connected in the Hermes books. You have 5 of them. Then as soon as the 5th book of Hermes ends, you get into this, and maybe I'm sort of anachronistic, and maybe my history isn't exact, but I think Serres would be okay with that. There's this another era which starts with the Parasite, right? But then you get the Genesis, you get the Biogena, you get all these other the 5 senses, right?
No, you do. It's he made a comment a lot sort of as he was finishing his career and later on he spent a lot of time talking through how he didn't, I'm going to get it wrong because I'm not as eloquent as him, but he spoke about sort of the warlike or authoritarian nature of sort of academia, how he didn't want to take part in that system and how his works were literally the opposite of that. Like he was doing work that was intended to counteract that. And I think that is a voice that he did not find very early in his career, but as you said, as Parasite landed and then others, you start seeing much more of him grabbing hold of that and running with it. Foundations trilogy, also very early, I would say beautiful prose, but as you get later, he moves far away from sort of that traditional academic, despite being deeply, deeply, deeply complex works at points and also because it's not like he shies away from mathematics elsewhere. He is this guy. That's his thing. His style becomes, it's just different. His style becomes digestible in a way that's much more on the poetic side. I compared it when we were chatting a bit earlier to Deleuze, to me, like early Deleuze, when you're talking about difference repetition, or his dissertation on Spinoza, not his monograph, the massive text.
Expressionism in philosophy.
Jesus Christmas, that is a dense, difficult, odd, like it is not, even though it's written at the same time as other stuff, I find infinitely digestible, it's equally complex. It's just, it's in that academic format. It's in a much more specific way that it's done. And you can sort of feel that in some of these works from Serres, that he's trying to find his voice, or he's trying to do his thing and find, his enjoyment in there as he makes his way through. And you mentioned, and I would love to sort of jump, because I think there's a beauty in starting the way the book does with the piece from on Plato, the Platonic dialogue and the intersubjective genesis of abstraction. And because as we're talking about sort of when we're reading it, as we're reading it, the interpretation we have of reading it, after Louise has done her interpretation of it off of papers that Serres wrote in time, there's all of these sort of layers that are being added to the text. And as we sort of do that, there's a line that, as I was reading, I was like, well, this feels apropos. Consider a written message at its source. It is only understood, we say, if the receiver possesses the key to the drawing. This is the condition of its reception, and it is essential. But there is another condition at the source that, although merely circumstantial, still merits analysis. The scribe must execute her or his drawing as well as possible. As we take in content, this piece, and it's talking about sort of a larger sort of abstraction and representation within a few other titles, but the idea of having to talk through and think through what they were intending when they wrote it, how it was written, the poor handwriting one may have had, the way that we sort of dismiss the wobbly lines, because it's just wobbly lines. That doesn't mean anything, even though it is part and parcel of when it was written and how. When someone's even translating this, and again, it's why I thought it was beautiful. It started with it. When you're translating a work and you're talking about someone misusing a word, or they use a word, well, maybe they meant this, but it's every part of a text, every part of a drawing, every part of a symbol is part of its creation. And we tend to oversimplify and sort of reify the hardest lines that we can interpret as part of that. And I really loved this piece, sort of opening it up, because it kind of felt, as we're talking about it, again, I don't know if that makes sense, but it felt like appropriate for the whole thing, because it's kind of a beautiful setup overall.
Yeah, I mean, we are here reviewing basically a translation. And the book, I mean, if it's not known yet, it's titled Hermes I, and the subtitle is Communications. So you'll see all of the text.
I'll put up a picture of the title here. I don't know how it works. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but like here, pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's a very, so beyond the introduction that he has before the text, and once we get into the text proper, he really discusses communication in its most basic form, which is a sort of a text and speech, and at the end dialogue, which, as we know, is like the Platonic dialogues are the start of philosophy proper. Like you might say, oh, philosophy has a longer history before Plato, and especially with like thinkers like Parmenides and even back to Thales, but it's with Plato that we get first like it's what one could consider a starting point of philosophy as such, especially if you want to think of Western philosophy as sort of the notion of being, and as the title of this little essay says, abstraction, and the Serres sort of takes that and in a very interesting way tries to rethink sort of scripts, text, and written and spoken word. And I think I think it is interesting, and I'm happy that we chose this first essay. This essay is the first thing we discuss in this book.
Yeah, and it opens as basically a discussion around the idea of symbols, how symbols are digested through sort of classic and traditional symbolic logic, then moves into graphemes, which moves into language, which moves into scientific writing, which moves into, and he just starts, and it, again, this is, you can see what I would call sort of later Serres in this. You can see his systems of thought, I think, and I even would say his style of writing coming through really beautifully here. It's early versions of it, but I really adore this period. He moves through all of it, even starting to have us sort of, again, question some of the assumptions we have as part of it when we talk about, for example, noise, which is all the stuff that we consider as not part of the message. How do we do this? How is the filtering process made in the taking in of the message and the symbol and the written graphism? The sort of immanence of all of this, and how does it work? And then also, as we're doing this, are we doing it as we're taking it in, or necessarily are we doing it as part of the presumption of, as he talks about, the third party? The you listening to this, I guess, as the two of us are having the conversation in our own dialogue, the dialogue we are having posits and presumes a third party who necessarily has to be excluded. We're not talking with you, we're talking at you. And this excluded third, this element that he starts introducing here, the demon, which he, again, I think, I don't want to say is a thread through a lot of his thoughts, the word demon, but that usage of that style of term, the prosopopoeia of noise, which is a hell of a fucking word to translate there, by the way. And Louise, that's no fun. But as he makes his way through and he's talking about sort of the elements, just to read another part, this conception of dialogue is immediately applicable to some famous philosophemes and is capable of drawing from them hitherto unsuspected meanings. For instance, the metaphysical meditations can be understood in terms of these principles as attempting to identify the other that must be united with the same in order to expel the third man. For the moment, though, we need to limit ourselves to the Platonic dialogues, where the maieutic method unites, in fact, the questioner and the respondent of the toil-giving birth. Dialectic makes the two interlocutors play on the same side. They struggle in concert so that a truth can emerge on which they are able to agree, which is to say, with the aim of successful communication. This aim, this end point, this goal that conditions the rest of the behaviors and the rest of the interactions, the way this combat happens on one side with the presumed the third person on the other, this element of communication becomes, I mean, this is the core of like so much work, but it's, I thought, put together pretty nicely here.
Yeah, and I think one can sort of, to plot it bluntly, the way Serres discusses writing and discusses dialogue and text here prefigures basically all of his thought, because this is exactly his project. And put it in concrete terms, philosophical thought and philosophical discussion for him, especially in, exemplified in Plato, is not so much an opposition between two sides, sort of a thesis, antithesis, one system against the other, which sort of battle and cancel each other out. Instead, he proposes an extremely different way. It's a different, and like maybe a different dialectic. It's a dialectic between philosophy and noise, abstract thought and empirical sort of particular unclear thinking. And this is, this again, one can already see his, he's still indebted to Leibniz and sort of the rationalists, which have that distinction between, the obscure empirical and the abstract that can be, understood distinctly, clearly, and intuitively at utmost end. And he's sort of replicating that, but he's not so much making it a battle of theses, of propositions, but one movement of communication that is sort of continuous almost, against the danger of not being able to communicate, the noise. And this communication is like, it's not sort of there before the noise, but it springs from it. It gets abstracted away. It transcends the noise. And that's how we get philosophy, which is interesting.
Well, and this is where we start seeing, because given the time frame this was written in, 66, 67, there was a passage in here that I was just like, he clearly knew our friend Deleuze. There's a handful of bits in here, because again, the timing of this is opposed to difference and repetition not even being released. Like this is, so when you start talking about, okay, so we return to logic, and it says, page 34, if you're wanting to follow, let us return to logic and thereby to writing. Mathematicians all agree to recognize the same symbol in two or more occurrences of the symbol. Yet every occurrence differs from every other whatsoever because of the graphism itself. Wobbly strokes, flaws in the alignment, and so forth. Consequently, the logician reasons not about the concrete graphic markings drawn on the board here and now, but rather, as Tarski says, about a class of objects having the same form. The symbol is thus an abstract entity that the graphic markings in question merely evoke. This abstract entity is recognized by the homeomorphism, if I may put it this way, of the graphic markings. The recognition of this entity presupposes that we distinguish the form from what I've named above, cacography, the poor writing, the literal contingent instantiation in time. And tell me that's not just straight up a really nice encapsulation of DNR and a lot of the ideas in that.
Yeah. And
I was stunned by it.
This was published way before DNR, right?
Yeah, it was.
It was
66?
So 2 years before DNR was published. But
Good
you
job
see,
there, Serres.
Yeah, but you see the sort of thought that was happening at France around that time. You get all these great thinkers basically springing around the same problem. You get Deleuze, Derrida, and like here Serres, right? Battling the same thing. And this is all, of course, the influence of structuralism. And there is this, in introduction written by the translator, it was made clear that, and this is true, like Serres is almost the structuralism at its strongest. It's like completely removed from linguistic structuralism, put into terms of mathematics. A thing I wanted to mention, and I find this extremely interesting, and this exemplifies Serres' thinking in comparison to some other thinkers, is that this sort of idea of, especially in Plato, when he discusses how, Platonism and the whole philosophy was basically constructed to avoid noise. There's this beautiful example that he uses of someone drawing a square in a sand, and we have to ignore all the imperfections and imagine it is a perfect square. So, and the form of the square is given. And he has this quippy little line how Plato then was an idealist, same as Leibniz. But the really cool part there is that it mirrors what someone like Badiou also confirms, is that philosophy requires mathematics as its condition, right? Mathematics is a sort of a perfected thinking for Serres, away from the noise, right? And in a similar vein, Badiou also considers mathematics to be this perfected way of thinking ontology, a way, like as a universality, like it's a completely universal language that is accessible to everyone, that is communicable to everyone, as soon as one is integrated within its, specific linguistics, as Serres itself says. And then Badiou does this thing where he completely separates mathematics and a more noisy sort of thinking that he terms poetry, right? And he keeps them at the opposite sides. They are impossible to communicate. For Badiou, they express opposite ends of the language itself. And Serres, in my opinion, flips that completely around. And instead of having this puritanical either or, as Badiou does, he forces a sort of a communication between them. He's not interested in having pure this or pure that. Mathematics already, sets itself away, and then the noise is already there. It conditions thinking as such. But for him, an interesting project is to be at the edge of the noise and to sort of establish communication between the empirical, particular, and the universal, and to really sort of write in that same way. And you can see that, for example, Badiou writes very mathematically, very analytically, and everything is sort of like he writes as Descartes would in Meditations, at least in Being and Event, and one can sort of mirror what Serres says here. Like he's looking for a unifying thing to avoid noise, right? And he's thinking of ontology. And of course, to be fair to Badiou does allow a bit of noise, into his system and the contingency of the event and so on. But Serres is so much different in that regard. Is that even when he see his text, he's mixing at the same time mathematics and poetry and literature. He's going into philosophy and history and all of this, and it's all a mess that sort of lets thought emanate from it. It's sort of like an encounter between so many things that are all partial, all sort of here and there, and you don't get clearly separated lines as Badiou, because Badiou's thinking is extremely organized. But in my opinion, like Serres' thinking is way more creative in that regard, and
much so. When he starts towards the end of the piece, it's one of my favorite little sections where he starts talking about how the reason that mathematics seems to be a clear field with very little noise, and we could say like there's a lot of scientific disciplines that this is probably true of now, where oh no, this symbol always means this. There's no cloudiness, no noise. It's because over time that communication has taken place in such a way that has become clear. It's a new problem becomes, as he says, amazing when it happens, because it's so baked into this one process where the elimination of noise and the definition of the thing are one and the same. The understanding mixes with that. They're one and the same act. They're interdependent. And so as such, the sort of way mathematics or traditional logic or whatever, pick anything, mathematics being his example, but really anything, that as things happen over and over within a community that's semi-insular, the communication over time causes those symbols to become reified and hardened and specified. And so as such, the noise goes. The noise, which is the interesting thing, the difference in between every instance, it disappears. As he said, the act of eliminating cacography, the attempt to eliminate noise, is both the condition of apprehension of the abstract form and the condition of the success of communication. That this is the nature of communication. Over time hardens these things, specifies them, closes them in, and eliminates noise. And this breaks things to the point where he's, as he says, and as you were saying, the creative act becomes such a shocking thing. A new problem. Why would there ever be a new problem? We know what all these things do. It's so specified. And I think that critique, I feel echoed, not just through all of his work, but a very cleanly put version of what will become the work of a lot of other thinkers as well.
Yeah, and as you said, one can see someone like Deleuze already implicit in here. And these sort of, one could name them thinkers of difference, Derrida, Laruelle, and so on. And it is extremely extremely interesting little piece that, like, if someone's doesn't want to read the whole book, I'd just recommend them to read this, because that's why I chose it as the first. Because one doesn't even have to know.
No, it's a great intro. It's a great intro to it, and it uses a lot of terms. How I read this, and this may be completely wrong, I read this as, at the end of it, it's ultimately a critique of the dialectic, of this idea that, over time, discussion finds truth. And he's like, no, the reason that happens is not because of the dialectic or some sort of, larger scale, grand idea of reason or us coming to a truth. It's that as the nature of communication causes the dialectic to sort of happen, that the discussion itself, the creation of mathematics, the creation of these sort of insular sort of strands where they talk to each other over time, naturally these things harden. Again, he says it at the end here, the connection in Platonism between a dialectic method and a progressive purification of abstract idealities in the manner of geometry is neither an accident in the history of ideas nor a mere incident in the deliberate decision-making of the philosopher. It is inscribed in the nature of things. I love that. To isolate an ideal form is to render it independent of the empirical domain and of noise. Noise is the empirical of the message, just as imperia is the noise of the form. In a sense, the minor Socratic dialogues are pre-mathematical in the same way as the measurement of a square plot of wheat in the Nile Valley. That's good, sir.
I'm extremely happy with this essay, and sadly, it's for me it doesn't mirror the rest of this part, because this is at the beginning, and there is. I
mean, it opened strong, and I loved it. And I was like, this is not a critique. Again, this is not a critique of Lewis's. I was able to get through much of the book, but I think this is the kind of book where, to me, I found myself. How do I even start this? I find there are two categories of books. Books I can just read, and then books I need to sit with a highlighter and fucking notepads and a computer browser open and 3 other books next to me. And I'm down with that, but I'm not used to a book being both. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
You're sort of, because you're reading one essay and it's just it just flows, right? And then you're immediately grasped into it. Then you're reading another essay and it's this highly academic sort of review. Basically, it's a review of a book. And of course, we haven't read these books. These are specific books for that period of some academics that, are forgotten by now, other than, that we have reviews of them.
Well, I mean, even stuff that I think most people have like a really decent grasp of, I don't think people have read. I have not. So let's just take because the entire mathematics chapter, I think, is that dense, difficult. I have no points of reference. It's very difficult for me to make my way through. It's the kind of thing I'm going to go back and I'm going to have to reread, and I'm going to have to pull up the books and texts. But even stuff that I would think I would understand. I've read Descartes as an example, but I love, he opens up the essay on Descartes. Everyone knows the third of the rules for the direction of the mind, in which Descartes identifies 2 operations of intellect. And I'm like, yeah, everyone. Yes. Everyone is aware. I too am everyone.
And then you're opening the directions of the mind, reading those. I forgot how many rules there are. I had to read it.
There are 4, I think, but I don't know this. And again, this is not. It has. I don't even know if I've ever actually read this. I don't know if I've ever actually read this or if I've just read other people mentioning it. But this is where we get into the difficulty, and this is I like a lot of Leibniz. I've read Leibniz. I don't know Leibniz. I've read some Descartes. I have issues with some Descartes. I am too stupid, apparently, to read all of the second chapter, because it moves from this first part where you don't really have to have read Plato. You don't really have to have read Hegel and understand the dialectic to be able to, it's a very digestible sort of essay. This entire second chapter, actually really the rest of the entire first half of the book, you have to know these titles, you have to know what people are saying about them, you have to have read other critiques on them, and I slowly receded into my brain multiple times trying to read it, because it's not. And so I defer to someone who's read these things. How are these parts for you? Because this ain't. I tried. I really, really, really tried.
And that's the thing, because the sort of Descartes he's mentioning isn't your cogito Descartes, because he starts the essay on the difference between Descartes and Leibniz, and he's quite clear. He says the history of Descartes that we have now is the history as Descartes is viewed from the Kantian or post-Kantian perspective. It's the extreme focus on cogito, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's this whole other point, and this was way more crucial at the time, and that's the Descartes of the method, and that's the Descartes of the rules for the direction of the mind. That's the whole sort of the whole Leibnizianism that often gets ignored for monadology and for sort of theodicy and so on, where he's extremely interested in how to even do science. So it's called the whole project of the general science. It was a huge problem back in the day. Like the method of even doing philosophical thinking and scientific thinking, which was sort of connected at the time, was an extreme problem for them. It often gets ignored, and I know this because I happened to have a class by a professor who's doing a sort of a new research into it. You wanna read this text? Most of them weren't translated. Like you wanna go, like it's all in Latin, and I only know it because
it's not fun to translate Latin, and it's not fun, generally speaking, to read Google Translate's version of it. I tried,
and it's not fun to read fragments of things that they were discussing and sort of letters they were sending to each other and all of that. And I had to write a paper on the concept of Mathesis Universalis, the universal mathematics, which is in the like there's I think there's 9 rules or 10, 12 rules. But like
yes, I do know this.
Yeah, exactly. Like these things are barely read because everybody focuses on meditations, right?
Well, but again, this is in the timing of all of these things is I think what matters, because the Descartes essays, substantial communication, these things, they're from 1960 to 1961. Like this is almost a decade earlier than the piece we were reading just a moment ago. And again, he's deep into the space of academia. The genealogy of Serres, I think, is incredibly important to being able to sort of parse this and understand kind of the timing that these things hit, but also maybe who really parts of this book are for and the types of people who could be reading them. When he's in his most deep academic work, which is, the 55 through 67, 68, I think is when he got his doctorate and moved on. That era is deeply academic, Serres, and it's where he's like nose deep in five layers deep of the bottom of the iceberg, basically, of philosophy and critiquing and reading people's critiques on those other things, because it's stuff that I'm only now, okay, I guess I've got more to read because I want to read these things, but it's like, Jesus, I've never even heard of some of this stuff.
And it also coincides with a very, because, in French, thinking was very much dominated by Sartre back in the day. And there was a revival of rationalist thinking in France. That's not very, people don't really think of it now, and it's not that even important. But this is where also Serres takes place, and he sort of has his own thing with it. But there, the people have went back and reread Descartes. And that's why you get all these books and like this consideration of this forgotten thing, like new translations, and it's and that's where Serres sort of sprouted as his early academic work.
Well, but on some of that, as I made my way through, I was very in my head. I'm like, I'm never coming back to this again. Oh shit, I'm going to. Like there was parts where I'm like, I now have to go read this because points he's making around, for example, Leibniz's monads and the section substantial communication that I think we both agree is like a great little section. I don't have the background in Leibniz I would like inside of that, but it's solid. And it seems like there's something very interesting happening. I love monadology is a thing. One moment, I've got a call coming. One moment.
G Fuel. Buy G Fuel.
All right. Sorry about that. All right, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. The area, for example, where he starts talking about various, specifically the harmony of pre-existing conditions with monads and how they're playing against each other. I don't have enough to be able to piece in my head where he's going, but at the same time, it is interesting enough to me that it pushed me back in a direction to go, I need to go reread and restudy and get back to monads. It's been a thing I've been putting off for a while. Like it's not a small amount of reading to get into Leibniz. But it feels interesting
with Leibniz. That's the problem. I mean,
to me, it's an interesting, because it feeds into a lot of other thinkers. His stuff is deeply foundational to a lot of people I really, really like in their writings. And this is another example of that, where the stuff he's talking about, he's giving deeply, I want to say he's playing with symbolic logic and mathematics in a very particularized way with monads that I feel like I could grasp if I had a better understanding. And it's interesting, and it's, again, early Serres. It's very academic, but I felt very, I don't know, intrigued by a lot of it, even though I'm deeply stupid. So.
We should move on to that essay then, because it's about time.
Well, no, we're there. I don't have much to add to this. I mean, should we make our way to the next? Because So
you want to talk about Leibniz? So are we talking about Leibniz one now?
We're talking about Leibniz now. Like
okay.
To me, the book kind of went like this. It's Platonic. Holy shit! This early essay is amazing. I grasp it. It's actually really brilliant the way he does a few things, and it's some quotes that I'm going to be using in the future. I love it. And then it's, holy shit! I don't understand anything here. I'm far too stupid. I'm far too stupid. I'm far too stupid. Wait, I'm too stupid, but I could not be. And then that's kind of the section when he starts making the move from Descartes to Leibniz and then straight through to Leibniz alone. And that's where I got picked back up. But I leave it to you. You have a better grasp than I do.
All right. So Leibniz. Leibniz is one of my favorite philosophers. And I've been doing, for years now, I've been reading, I've been researching Leibniz. And one thing that Serres also appreciates about Leibniz is that it is an absolute mess to read Leibniz. Because,
I'll buy it.
For example, people always come to you and they're like, where should I start with Deleuze? And you can say, start here. There's this book. There's that book.
Read the last 3 sentences of 1,000 Plateaus and you're good.
Yeah.
That's what I say now.
But
I don't. That's a lie.
There's clear, like, if you want to say, well, what is Deleuze's magnum opus? You can say, well, you can at least have 3 choices. You can say, what is philosophy, his last work? Or you can say, difference and repetition, that sets his thinking. Or you can say Anti-Oedipus, his seminal work with, Guattari. But if I were to ask you, where to start with Leibniz?
I have an answer.
What is the answer?
Monadology.
Yeah.
With a proper guide.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
And there's not a lot of guides. I have one. It's a new translation and guide. It's it's interesting, and it's like what we do actually with Anti-Oedipus, the DGQC. It's everything explained for people who don't super get it. And I picked this up because of this text, because I spent a little bit of time trying to figure out how the fuck do I get into Leibniz, because I had this nightmare for forever, which is the philosophical papers and letters, and pass. It's not for me. Worth buying because it's filled with like diagrams, and I would die. I would die before I'd understand any of that. So yeah, it's difficult. Leibniz is no fun, man.
Yeah, and I would disagree with you. Monadology, if you're already not familiar with Leibniz, is an extremely dense, extremely obtuse text, and you're missing the core of it. Like it's a very nice sort of listed. It's written sort of geometrically, and you can sort of follow it. But at the end of the day, it seems like completely speculative, metaphysical sort of text. Monads, whatever, right? And so it's creative, and one can say that. But the problem with Leibniz is that monadology isn't his magnum opus. It's not even the core of his work. It's a sort of and this is what I was getting to. Serres' point, and this is his structuralist reading of Leibniz, there is no center to Leibniz. Leibniz is almost decentered thinker. All of his texts, everything he ever wrote, are enmeshed into this network of thoughts and attempts and sort of an interest between mathematics, between theology, between metaphysics.
Great.
And if you want to start with Leibniz, you have to choose a perspective and then read a bit. You start with his mathematics and then jump to something else, then jump something else, then jump something else. In my opinion, and this is my reading, and Serres might disagree. The core of Leibniz's project is his encyclopedic project, his attempt to sort of write and to explicate thought. It is, and you might not know this, but Leibniz. Sorry, my camera was freaking out. That's why I stopped. So maybe you can cut this out. So
no issues on my side.
Like if you read someone like Cassia and his comments, who Serres of course cites, like his magnum opus was unwritten, and it's his encyclopedia. It is his universal science. That was his project his whole life. From if you read his early text, like when he was extremely Cartesian, to his end of life, he was always obsessed with the idea of universal science, of the way to ground all sciences. And this was his also biggest opposition to Descartes, because for Descartes, the universal science is a purely mathematical science that just, is concerned with measurements and relations. But Leibniz wants to enmesh, in his universal science, wants to enmesh moral, theology, metaphysics, your empirical science. He wants to have everything there. And that's why his thinking is so interlaced and so just it's difficult to find connections. How does this connect to this? How are his like texts on logic and like early sort of predicative logic? How are they connected to his metaphysics? And it's an extremely difficult task. Serres does an amazing thing when he says it's a whole system. It's sort of a structuralist system where nodes are connected and they influence each other without giving us one unified whole where one can say, like, they exist in a differential in differential relations without giving us one complete picture that can be grasped in its entirety. And this leads us to this essay and to the problem of communication between monads, right?
I mean, I don't follow at all, but yes, no, it does. I'm making a joke. Like, it's, again, communication being the core of all of this as we make our way through, starting with early the Platonist ideals and playing with how noise essentially gets eliminated through the digesting of things. And we sort of move into this symbolic space. Monads, as he's taking through it, is almost breaking the other direction. It's moving, is sort of anti-representationalist. It's a very different way of communication inside of the entire thing. Again, I don't grasp it fully. I'm not smart enough yet, but I will hopefully be at some point. I'd love, please continue. I'm not going to stop. But that's kind of all I got from it, that there's more, that this is happening. Like, again, communication at every level. What is communication? How does communication operate? What communicates? Where does communication? Is the entirety of this entire book. Where it happens with monads is where I lose. Again, I'm not that guy, and I don't want to even make an ass of myself, but the way he talks about harmony, for example, inside of this, and how they sort of how harmony preconditions the communication and sets that up, feels very in line with my understandings of Serres' thought. But again, I don't grasp it enough.
And yeah, and it's also very faithful to Leibniz himself, I have to say. So I mean, if just quickly, because this is my pet essay, I have to say. It's the one I had most fun. And because he also mentioned some really obscure texts that most people haven't read, and I'm sort of having fun going back to my Leibniz books and reading some Latin as well. The thing here is, and this was like so it starts from a really simple problem, and it's, let's take monads as given. Like, you read monadology, they're windowless, completely closed in itself, units, like indivisible. They don't interact with each other. There's no causal relation between them, and so on. There's multitude of ways to understand this. But the question that Leibniz asks is, well, they are organized in a harmony. They work harmoniously, so they have to communicate. And usually, the picture of this, like if you're studying, if you're studying Leibniz in a class, they'll say, every monad works for itself, like every instrument in orchestra plays its own little part, but they all are looking at the conductor and their notes, and that's how you get, that's how they communicate. And that's fine, that still works. That's a pretty good example. But then the problems arise, well, and this is what he's basically discussing, mathematically and geometrically, this doesn't work if we also want to make it the simplest and most perfect way of organizing the world. So, like, if I wanna have 2 points, and this is his point, if I wanna have 2 points, what's the best way to connect them? Well, it's a straight line between the 2 points, right? They're communicating with a straight line. Well, according to Leibniz, there is 2 points. They all both to God, and through God they communicate. So that's clearly not the most direct way, right? And
Sure. I'm just going to say sure. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And it works because since so, and
half of this book, half of this book melted my brain because I didn't go to school for this. This is not my world. And I'm very open that I come from a non-academic background, to say the fucking least. So half of this book melted my brain. Half of it excited it a lot. So it's kind of this really odd sort of interplay of them. But if you're going to try to explain this, you're going to fail with me. I hate to break it to you. I'm going to make my way through this, and then we're going to try it again, and then we'll try it again, and we'll try it again. And maybe, podcast 100, we'll do a revisit, and I'll reread, and we'll see if I am less dumb.
Yeah, but I want to keep it away. I'm just explaining this so I can move away from the Leibniz itself and to sort of make a broader point about it. Okay?
Do that.
All right. So the problem is communication between self-enclosed units. And you can see that as a science. You can see it as whatever, right? As poetry and philosophy. Like these completely enclosed, because think about the way that science functioned back in the day of Serres and the way it does now, like as well, right? It's its own thing. Doesn't need philosophy, doesn't need anything, right? Literature, it's its own thing. Doesn't need but in this world, they are all given, and there is sort of a communication between them as they are functioning almost independently from each other. The question is how to think of such a system without first of going back to sort of direct banal causality, and also making it not having to postulate some third actor, that this sort of manipulates it all. He uses Leibniz's pre-established harmony, and that was a problem for Leibniz as well. And the thought is, for Serres, is that in a very simple systems, the line mathematically, and again, very important, since communication is according to Leibniz as well, how we just said that you can do theology and everything through this universal science. Every science is able to communicate with each other. Everything is explicable, demonstrable through mathematics because everything can communicate. Leibniz also has to demonstrate this communicability through of the monads mathematically. And this is the point of this essay, is just to say, yeah, you can do it. And the points are quite simple. If you take 2 lines and you connect them, sure, that's the quickest way. But take an almost infinite amount of nodes that just exist, right? And those nodes can be monads. The quickest way to connect them is actually through the third party. And the shortest way to connect them all is through the third party in which they're all contained, right? And
which comes again to that beginning piece. I mean,
it's connected, right?
Because that comes back to the original conversation we were having with the first dialogues, where we talk about the reasoning of the dialogues is for that third excluded party, which makes the dialogues whole. All right. That's a fair explanation. I feel slightly less stupid.
Yeah. And
Not
of course,
much,
he goes around and he demonstrates it. We don't have to go into the mathematics; they're not that important. And there's also the critique of Cartesian geometry, that happens to algebra. Again, not important. But the important part is sort of this ability to think intuitively about a system of discontinuous instances which are connected through this harmony. That's what Leibniz allows him to do. And then he reiterates in so many points, he says the God is also the harmony, is also, the creator, is also this and that. You can't separate things in Leibniz's system, as people have attempted to say the perfect harmony is is just creation of God and God is separate, or this, everything sort of emanates in this structure of perfect harmony. And it's exactly, and this is where it's not a perfect harmony, it's pre-established harmony, I'm sorry. And this pre-established harmony is, in my opinion, and maybe in Serres' opinion, where Leibniz thinks par excellence. And that's where you should start. Not with the monadology, but start with the texts on pre-established harmony. They're very short. They're basically letters to other thinkers, and he's trying to re-explain himself to other thinkers. But if you start from there and see his whole system contained with this pre-established harmony as sort of a structuralist system of interrelated nodes, you're going to be able to jump here and sort of draw connections and be creative with Leibniz, same as Serres is. So that's all I have to say on this little essay.
That's all.
Sorry, I was very long-winded.
No, it's good. It's good. It was a lot. And I think this is when we made our selection, we were going through and we were debating over which ones we'd talk through. I wanted to have you do this because I would not be able to do justice, and I don't want to skip over because I don't want to shit on these sections. I'm just not there, and they are so deep and interesting. And I would say from what I've read in general and what you just said, it does seem like you are in the space of what I'm understanding Serres is getting at, but there's a lot more to sort of put into place for me. And so I think it's not often I would say this. A lot of Serres books I'll read and I'll reread maybe, but it's not like I'll sit there with notes. This is one where I'm going to be going back through and going, okay, after I've gone through and I think I've grasped more Leibniz and I've done this and I've done this, written more, I feel like this would be a good way to test that and be able to sort of make my way through. I dig it. So it's cool. It's good. But to me, it's easier to digest in pieces like, for example, where he starts going into, I don't know if I would say he's critiquing Foucault, but he's definitely going into the order of things and Las Meninas and moving more into my space of things, which is the world of art and interactivity and the human experience with things. And a piece, The Ship's Turning Back, where he goes over what is one of my favorite paintings of all time, and I've been fortunate to see it at Prato.
I'm jealous.
Las Meninas. It's one of the things that I encourage people to see. Las Meninas is, as Foucault talks about, in the order of things, and it's a focal point in the order of things for me as well. It's one of the main sort of parts I got of the book myself. The whole book's incredible. It's my favorite work from Foucault. Oddly enough, usually people who come from Deleuze love madness. I'm an order of things guy. But Las Meninas, for those who don't know, wonderful piece. It's hanging in Madrid, depicting king and queen, and sort of was not really an interesting piece on the surface. If I just tell you what it is, it's a portrait done of the king and queen and their family. You know, they did royal portraits all the time. They hired this one artist who did this one painting. Why this painting? Why does it matter? Because, and there have been, it's hard to even describe how much work has been done on this painting because of the massive depth of meaning that is in every corner. It is, you could say, and I think Foucault makes a strong argument for it, that it's the first postmodern painting or an understanding of sort of the subject existing or the sort of displacement of oneself when you see it. Paintings up until then were very romantic. They were depicting a pure form, an angel or a god or a king or queen in portraits and fruit, land, whatever. Fantasy or not, they were depicting the thing. Las Meninas exists being aware that there is a person looking at it as a painting. And that's not a thing you can say very cleanly about a lot of other work prior, but there's no way to interpret it in any other way. I've read very convincing pieces talking about how the intention behind Las Meninas is actually a proletarian message, that the thing it's trying to say to you is that you as the viewer are actually the king and queen, because that's the perspective it's done from. Because, and I'll pop up the painting here and I'll kind of do a sort of mini talk through of it. So we'll kind of move around. But here you've got Vasquez, who's painting, and he's kind of dipping over and he's looking at you, but you can see clearly in the back mirror the king and queen. It's very faint. Now, how was this done and when was this done? Were the king and queen in the room? Did he do it outside of the room? Actually seems like he painted it with them in the room, because the mathematics of everything is almost too perfect for him not to have. Everything around it is extraordinary. There's little details of Greek paintings in the background, of gods here, child here, man in darkness in the back coming down the stairs. There's all this stuff. But it's hard to explain until you see it in person, because the scale is such that just standing in the right spot, you're in the room with him. Like you are the king. And it's a weird feeling. It's genuinely a weird feeling. There's a reason Foucault spends so much time on it in the order of things. With the ships turning back, Serres is, I don't know about critiquing Foucault. I would say extending a lot of what Foucault wrote and everything, really focusing on a handful of bits that are happening inside of it. You could argue a lot of things inside of Meninas. Just enjoy it. One of my favorites, a Japanese artist, I'll put it up here, who did a series called Nighttime, Night Falls on Meninas, which is 9 paintings of the painting. But in some of them, he's standing painting it, but the painting's over there. So it's like insanely meta artwork. That's Las Meninas is like super meta. It's hard to describe. To steal from Serres, I'm just going to read the beginning here because I think it's worth just mentioning as a thing. At the Prado, it's in Madrid, it is possible to view Las Meninas in a mirror. Between the painting, the image, and the image of the painting, there is sufficient room to move around in, and this forces the realization that what the mirror unfolds in it's receding depths is precisely the reality of the space enveloped by the flat canvas. As if Velázquez's Velázquez's épure was returned to its true exteriority. Beginners in descriptive geometry are sometimes given a type of optical device that makes the rabattements, the lines in a diagram, appear and opens the solid up to its objective dimensions. It is as though the representation had buried the object and its duplication restored it, as though the real could only be rediscovered in the state of images, shadows of shadows. Is the thing the doubling back of representation, a representation that returns? Viewing it in a mirror, the whole thing's, the painting's insane. You actually can place yourself in the spot of the painter, sort of. It's wild. And as you start doing this, you start playing with what this thing is. It is not just the image. It is not just the representation. There's something else happening there. There's as he says here, is it a representation that returns through the act of this type of perceiving in this specific way? There's a lot done in this. There are sights from which you can see without being seen, others from which you can see without failing to be seen, and finally others where the slightest displacement transforms these two spaces into one another, like the fingers of a glove. This is probably my favorite piece in the book, by the way. This is probably my favorite piece of the book. If you can't tell from how I'm rambling and not letting you talk at all.
I'm just happy to let you ramble.
This is like, Las Meninas is like so important, and it's such a thing that it's hard to even describe. This is my own theory of art and how art works and how we take it in through the diagrammatic, sort of the Deleuze and Guattarian way. This speaks to that so much, the way that we procedurally generate meaning through the movement of our eyes, through the art, based on our position. And Las Meninas is aware of this. The artist was aware of this as he went through. And there's so much done. But he does this interesting thing. The thing I want to sort of play with is, and he says it very specific, do I have to choose, or does history, which is to say movement, choose for me? Is there a secret that on the surface of the canvas sets free the crossed or parallel play of light and stops the random vibration on either side of this threshold? Is this canvas, which the painter momentarily stands back from, resting immobile to the right, for us, of the boundary, a surface we can read on? Once again, this requires reading the other way around. Not in a mirror this time, but on the other side of the other. That is, on the other side, there, between two horizontal beams that support the back of the canvas, at the same level as Velázquez's head, eye for eye, mouth for mouth, we can discern, amidst the random smudges and diffuse grayish tinge, a skull, firmly centered on the optical trajectories, and to the left, for us, of the rift. Naturally, this disquieting phantom can be better seen in the mirror than on the painting itself, or the reverse side of the painting of the painting. Death is indeed, quote, that upon the basis of which knowledge in general is possible, or the unconscious or the unthought. If the condition of this possibility is, in the final analysis, the ultimate reverse of cascading representations, here it is already unseen. What no one looks at, occupied as they are with computing compositions and transpositions in the discernible, but where natural light leads as soon as we cross the brightest, straightest, and most rigorous line, the second metaphor, somber moiety. This isn't in Foucault's work. This is an extension in a really extraordinary way, because the way he breaks down in the order of things, the composition and the way everything is, it's very diagrammatically based. And that's why Serres is making this point that we have the lines, we can see where, oh, look, we know because of the angles here that this was back here and the artist was here and all this. All of these lines are there. But there's this weird thing that happens. If you look at it from this one perspective, sort of backwards, you're going to notice there's death. There's a smudge. Now, it's not a thing, if you were to put it into an AI and ask, is there a skull in here? They'd go, no. If you were to ask the majority of art students, they go, no. Because people are more, what is there? Rather than these odd smudges and the symbology they create. This, in the context of the rest of the book, I would probably say best, the skull is noise, pure noise, almost, that is being removed for the sort of the clean lines of the rabattements, the diagrammatic sort of side of, oh, this goes here, here's how these things are ordered. Oh, look at the rule of thirds, look at these squares, look at how this is laid out. But we miss the noise because the noise removed, but in the noise is death. It's fucking one of the most poetic, interesting things I've ever read about Las Meninas. I've never read anything on this, and I don't know why I've never heard of this before, but it's a fucking amazing piece. Sorry for the ramble. I don't know how else to sort of do that except for rambling. It's
love
amazing.
The ramble, and I have a thinker for you. I have a recommendation.
Oh, please.
George Didi Uberman is a art historian.
George who?
Didi dash hyphen Huberman. He's a. Should I write it down for you?
D.D. Huberman. All right, I've got him. He looks like young Guattari.
He is your, like, he's extremely influenced by Deleuze's cinema, right? And by Foucault, right? He's one of my favorite thinkers. He's barely translated. He's not very well read, because I'm also very into art. So,
oh my God, I have 2 of his books. Bark is one of my favorite. Bark is extraordinary. The Invention of Hysteria as well. I need to remember these people. I have Bark. It's right there. Holy shit.
I recommend, just there's a short little text called, oh, what's the name? It's on the pictures. It's called The 4 Images of Holocaust or something.
It's the 4 Images in Spite of All.
Images in
the
Spite
title.
of All. So
4 photographs from Auschwitz.
It's an extremely interesting story. So the story is this: there's only 4 ever pictures ever taken. I wrote a paper on this. That's why my pet topic. There's 4 ever pictures taken from inside of the gas chambers of Holocaust. So I don't know if you have to do a trigger warning here, but this is a heavy topic.
Right. Whatever. I'll do a trigger warning at the beginning. Don't listen.
Yeah.
It's just easier. Don't listen to us. It's easier.
So it's taken from inside of it's taken from the inside of the chamber, facing outside. You see piles of people. You see the Sonderkommando. Sonderkommando were the Jewish people who were tasked with disposing of the bodies and running of the gas chambers and of the crematorium, because the SS, the Nazis wouldn't do it. It was absolutely horrible. You see some SS around, right? And the pile of bodies, it's all extremely blurry. It's all like there's this big black blocks of the walls that you can't see. It's taken by like a handheld camera in the 1945. So it was really bad, right? And throughout the history of it, and it's connected, trust me, all attempts were made to clean up the pictures, to zoom in on specific areas, to do this and that, right? And Didi Uberman and a couple of others, I forgot their name, in the 2000s, early 2000s, they decided, no, we're going to make an exhibition and publish the pictures as they are. And this was a radical move. And the Images in Spite of All was written as a companion piece to that exhibition. It was extremely controversial. All these Lacanians were extremely against, you can't represent the unimaginable. You shouldn't ever post a picture. It was.
I remember this.
Yeah,
I remember this.
It's stupid.
He's extraordinary.
Yeah, but the point was, by editing pictures, we are removing the noise from these pictures that is so crucial to it. Because think of the dynamisms of the ones who had to take those pictures. They had to risk their lives. It's all blurry. They had to, take it from within the gas chamber. Picture in its raw form shows you it as a living thing, as a thing that was taken within a specific moment, and this noise has more meaning inside of it than that any specific object that you can put into it.
No, it's just 2 extensions of that, because I adore the point. I've now got a bunch of his books up. I'll give them a order. I'll also post a link description, I guess. The same critique I saw someone making, it may have been him, around 9/11. One of the things that you've seen since 9/11 is the primary image that everyone uses is this very stable, almost tripod version of the plane crashing, the second plane crashing. There was dozens of videos of the planes hitting because there were camera crews on the ground. There were already people filming because of the first. There's even video footage of the first plane hitting because it happened to be a firefighter documentary happening, like weird coincidences like that. But they're brutal in that their perspective is from someone literally on the ground. And when you see it from that perspective, it's horrifying in a way that's hard to even explain. And so it's almost sanitizing to use the simpler, like distant, far away, here's the plane, oh my God, and it's the woman screams, oh my God, like they're shocked. But it's not the guy underneath looking up. It's not like they're different. You don't see the plane go in the same way. It's on the other side of the building. It's simplified. And now we're seeing that, I think, in the most extraordinary path where once upon a time, the internet was a place of the worst and grossest shit that existed on the planet. You'd see horrifying pictures everywhere. Like liveleak.com was like a big place, but I'm not going to name the other sites I used to visit. I had a dark personality for a long time.
Same. I was there.
That's all gone. And now that we have a literal war with some of the worst atrocities happening, and we have in a couple places for the last 3 or 4 years, the internet's been very good at being censored and cleaned and cleared up to where we're not seeing thousands of feeds. We're not seeing thousands or hundreds of thousands of videos. We're seeing specific ones sort of at the end of that filtering process with the noise removed, with all of that stuff gone. And I think it's telling as well. It's it's amazing story. I love Huberman's work, phenomenal. Check it out. Bark is one of the more moving, shorter passages. Tiny little book if you can find a copy. It's 100% worth it. Just wonderful.
If you're interested in more like actual Deleuzian, non-linear history of art, when he does crazy things, he analyzes romance picture and compares them to someone like Pollock, and not even romance, Renaissance, and he has this awesome, very well-founded way of approaching art that is very much in line with Deleuze and Foucault and all of them. I really recommend him, and he needs to be more translated. Same as Serres. He's a great thinker.
I would agree. I agree with fully with that. But to finish out, because I think actually here is where I want to. We were going to discuss a few other sections, but I think we can close out a lot here because it's as we make our way through this, and we've talked through sort of all these things. The idea of how communication operates, how elements communicate with each other, with us, how the nodes of communication that exist inside of any communication network, how these things interplay. Hermes is an interesting book to be able to see where Serres began working his way through this, contrasted against other thinkers, some of which I'm not familiar with, some of which you are, some of which the other readers may or may not be. But it's a phenomenal place to start with him. This actually feels like a book I may start recommending to people who are a little, I would say, deeper into various, whether it's philosophical or mathematical. If you're into that, this would be a great place to start with Michel Serres' work. And I got to tell you, I really have enjoyed reading all of it.
And not only that, there's also literature in there. The last essay, which is also really good, is on Don Juan.
Mm-hmm.
There is, I have to check. I can't name it.
He does Cinderella.
Cinderella, yes.
And he does the Sorceress. He does like some the fairy tale stuff that he plays with, and then even 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And those kinds of things. The Great Journey of Captain Nemo, which I always. I appreciated the more I got through the book. There's parts of it where I was writing. I was like, I don't know if I should review this. This is not. I was confident early on, and then I was not confident at all. And then the confidence came back, and then it went away, and then it came back, and then went away. And I think that would be my review. Is phenomenal what I understood, and what I didn't. I could tell there's something a lot more there that I want to dive into. That'd be my short version.
Yeah, I just recommend it as sort of a bite-sized essays. It's like because the point of the book is to establish communication. That's why he goes from he connects in literature and mathematics and philosophy and it's all there is this underlying structure of that he is discussing communication itself, and every essay sort of does talk about that in a way, but I recommend if one wants, just take the book and read an essay and see something about what maybe literature is a bit easier. Don Juan essay was that's the conclusion, right? That one was almost the clearest. If one has read or even just Googled like the synopsis, one can follow it quite easy, and the point is quite clear and fun to follow. and basically replicates most of the theses that happened throughout the book, just in this time in connection with a play.
No, I agree completely. And it's really, I mean, there's a reason it's part of the conclusion and that it's been organized like that by the translator. It really is about that sort of the ending of how the points of communication happen and how these things come back into themselves. And it is easier. I mean, again, Don Juan, these things I'm familiar enough with. I can get stuff from it. So it was solid. But again, the Las Meninas piece, like alone made it this whole thing worth reading for me. I read it twice and I went through and there's a whole bunch of side text on it that I could go through, but it actually goes far deeper into, I think, what Foucault was trying to pull out than anything else. And he does an amazing job with it. So yeah, I think with that, do you recommend a good recommendation? Yay?
Yeah,
Hermes?
I think
Hermes
especially, I recommend it. Even if to sort of read just a bit of what was happening in the 60s, but away from Deleuze and Derrida and Althusser, you know, or even someone like Rancière or Balibar, all those like big names, and to, you know, maybe follow some minor thinkers of the French theory.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to me, it's a great way to do some of his literary critique and some of his commentary later to see where that originated and how he started. And again, a lot of people forget that these ideas sort of all come at once inside of spaces. So the idea of difference and how it operates, these things that are deeply Deleuzian. I think Deleuze gets, deservedly, a good amount of credit. But a lot of people forget that there was a lot of other work being done at the time that obviously was influencing and counter-influencing and playing with. And Serres is deeply unrecognized for a lot of that because it's really good shit. But yeah, that'll be it. That's our run today for the Quarantine Collective. We're going to be doing a bunch of these. So if you guys have books you want us to read, don't hesitate to join up the server. It's discord.gg/GGQC. Or drop in the comments or whatever. We're here for fun. We want to see if this is a thing people give a shit about. We're going to be doing more of them, right? We got a few more, Yuri?
Yeah, we have a couple of already planned. Like
We do. Big one coming up with a big furry sniffle ear.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun.
Lots of ideas. So it's
yeah,
it's going to be
drop
fun.
notes to us. Come say hi.